The Xerion survey vessel, emergent clarity, drifted through the void, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with photosynthetic energy as it studied the blue-green world below. High Captain Xerion observed the planet through the organic view screen, his emerald-scaled fingers tracing the data streams that flickered across its surface. The humans called this place Earth, a fragile, waterlogged rock teeming with chaotic life. Xerion exhaled through his respiratory vents, the sound a soft hiss of amusement. The galactic consensus had long dismissed this species as soft, physiologically weak, emotionally volatile, and hopelessly disorganized. Their history was a tapestry of petty wars, their technology laughably primitive. Even now, their orbital defenses were crude, their ships slow and ungainly compared to the sleek, biomechanical elegance of Xerion vessels. High Captain Ursek, his chief scientist, approached, her bioluminescent filaments flickering with subdued curiosity. Initial scans confirm our projections. Human bone density is inferior. Muscle fiber efficiency is suboptimal. Their neural structures are erratic. Xerion's mandibles twitched in satisfaction. And their military. Ursek manipulated the holographic display, pulling up footage of human soldiers, clumsy, slow, their movements hampered by bulky armor and outdated projectile weapons. Their combat doctrine relies on attrition rather than precision. They lack the discipline of true warriors. Xerion leaned back in his command throne, the living metal of the ship humming beneath him. The Xerion Dominion had encountered countless species before, each falling neatly into categories, conquerable, irrelevant, or rarely worthy of alliance. Humanity, it seemed, belonged firmly in the second category. Observe this, Ursek continued, highlighting a human battlefield. Explosions tore through mud and steel, bodies littering the ground. They throw themselves into slaughter without tactical refinement. Their commanders waste lives for negligible gains. Xerion's crest of sensory spines rippled in disdain. Such wastefulness was unthinkable to the Xerion, whose warriors were bred for efficiency. Their every strike calculated, their every loss measured against the greater equation of victory. A flicker of movement caught his attention, a human soldier, wounded, dragging himself toward a fallen comrade. The man's ribs were visible through his torn uniform, his breath ragged, yet his hands still clutched his weapon. Fascinating, Ursek murmured. Despite catastrophic damage, this specimen continues to fight. Illogical. Xerion dismissed it with a wave. Desperation, not strength. A cornered animal will always lash out. The screen shifted to another scene, a human officer, Major Elizabeth Harriman, standing amidst the ruins of a shattered city. Her face was streaked with ash, her uniform torn, but her voice carried unwavering authority as she rallied her troops. "Hold this line," she roared. Her words translated by the ship's linguistic matrix. "They don't get past us." Xerion felt a prickle of irritation. There was something unsettling about her defiance. The humans should have broken. They should have surrendered. Yet here they stood, battered but unbroken, as if the very concept of defeat was alien to them. Ursek tilted her head. Their psychological resilience is anomalous. Galactic military doctrine states that a Fey casualty rate should induce rout, yet these humans fight on at Fey losses, Xerion scoffed. A flaw in their evolution, they lack the instinct for self-preservation. But as he watched the feed, human medics dragging wounded through gunfire, engineers rebuilding barricades under artillery strikes, soldiers laughing in the face of annihilation, a cold doubt crept into his mind. What if we have misjudged them? The thought was fleeting, quickly buried beneath centuries of Xerion superiority. The humans were weak, they were soft, and the galaxy had no mercy for the soft. Word count. Fey the human diplomatic vessel harmonies. Resolve drifted into Xerion, controlled space like a leaf on a quiet stream. Unassuming, fragile, its smooth white hull devoid of the jagged weapon mounts and pulsating energy signatures that marked a true warship. High Commander Xerwind observed it through the bioluminescent viewport of his flagship, Emerald Dominion, his mandibles twitching in amusement. The humans had sent a diplomat. How quaint. Scan it, he ordered, his voice a low hum of organic resonance. Ursek, his chief scientist, extended a delicate tendril of thought into the ship's neural interface. The Dominion scanners pulsed, bathing the human vessel in waves of yellow-green bio. Energy data streamed across the living displays, their surfaces rippling like liquid emerald. Minimal shielding, Ursek reported, her voice tinged with disbelief. No plasma lances, no railgun arrays. Their propulsion is primitive. Chemical thrusters augmented with crude ion drives. Xerwind exhaled, a sound like wind through hollow reeds. They truly are as backward as we thought. The Harmony's resolve hailed them, its transmission crisp. Polite. A human face appeared on the view screen. Major Elizabeth Harriman, her dark eyes steady, her posture relaxed. She wore no armor, only a simple navy blue uniform adorned with insignia Xerwind didn't recognize. High Commander Xerwind, she said, her voice calm, measured. On behalf of the United Earth Confederacy, we extend greetings and offer peaceful dialogue. Xerwind's amusement deepened. Peaceful dialogue, as if the galaxy respected such things. We acknowledge your presence, he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Though we must admit, we expected something more. Formidable from a species that claims sovereignty over its own star systems. Harriman didn't flinch. We prefer to lead with words before weapons. Ursek's tendrils flickered in silent laughter. Xerwind leaned forward, his carapace clicking. A noble sentiment, but words are wind in the void. Major power is what matters. Harriman smiled, small, knowing. Then perhaps we understand each other better than you think. Behind her, unnoticed by the Xerion sensors, a team of human engineers worked in the shadows of the Harmony's resolve. Their instruments were passive, their scans undetectable to the Dominion's organic systems. They weren't just observing, they were learning. Sergeant Paul McKay, a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts, watched the alien vessel's energy signatures flicker across his screen. His fingers danced over the interface, tracing the patterns of the Xerion's biomechanical systems. Got it, he muttered. Their shields pulse in 12-second cycles. Teresa gap, microscopic, but it's there. One of the junior engineers frowned. You think we can exploit that? McKay's grin was razor thin. Oh, we will. Meanwhile, Ursek continued her analysis, oblivious. Their vessel is perplexing, she admitted. No visible weaponry. Yet they move with confidence, almost as if they expect no threat. Xerwind scoffed. Or they are too foolish to recognize one. But as he watched the human ship, its smooth, unbroken hull, its quiet, unyielding presence, something nagged at him. The galaxy was not kind to the weak. And yet, here the human stood, unarmed, unafraid. The answer, when it came, was a whisper in the back of his mind, cold and unwelcome, because they do not believe they are weak. Word count. The Xerion warship Verdant Maw hummed with organic energy, its corridors lined with pulsing veins of yellow-green light. The air carried the faint scent of ozone and something else, something alive, like the electric tang of a storm-charged forest. High Commander Xerwind stood at the center of the docking bay, his emerald carapace glistening under the bioluminescent glow of the ceiling's photosynthetic nodes. The humans had accepted his invitation to board, a foolish move. By Xerion standards, no species with any sense of self-preservation would willingly step onto an alien warship without heavy escort. Yet here they came, 3 figures in simple, unadorned uniforms, their posture relaxed, their expressions unreadable. Xerwind's secondary eyelids flicked shut in irritation. This is a test. They should be afraid. The lead human, Major Elizabeth Harriman, stepped forward. She was tall for her kind, though still dwarfed by Xerwind's towering frame. Her dark eyes swept the chamber with detached curiosity, lingering on the organic latticework of the walls, the pulsing energy conduits snaking along the floor. No flinching, no hesitation. Ursek, standing beside Zerwind, shifted uneasily. Her tendrils twitched as she studied the humans through her scanner. "Their biosigns?" she murmured. "No elevated heart rates, no adrenal spikes. They are calm." Zerwin's mandibles tightened. Impossible. Even the most disciplined Xerion warriors showed some physiological response to entering an enemy vessel. Then his gaze dropped to Harriman's hands. They were clasped loosely behind her back, but not before he caught the faint, silvery lines tracing her knuckles. Old scars, too precise to be accidental, surgical, deliberate. The kind left by monofilament blades, or the careful removal of shrapnel. His eyes flicked to the others. The human called McKay had a similar mark, a thin, pale crescent along his jawline, nearly invisible unless the light caught it just right. The third, a younger human, bore no visible scars, but the way he moved, controlled, balanced. Every step measured, spoke of training beyond mere diplomacy. Ursek noticed it too. "Commander," she whispered, her voice tinged with something like unease. "These are not civilians." Zerwin said nothing. The realization settled over him like a slow, creeping frost. The humans weren't afraid, because they had no reason to be. They had been here before, not on a Xerion ship perhaps, but in places just as hostile, in wars just as unforgiving, and they had survived. The docking bay's energy webs pulsed softly, casting shifting patterns of light across the humans' faces. Harriman met Zerwin's gaze, and for the first time, he saw it. Not defiance, not arrogance, but something far more unsettling. Recognition. She knew what he was thinking, and she was letting him. Ursek's scanner beeped once, a quiet, almost apologetic sound. "Their ship," she said slowly, "is transmitting, encrypted bursts, short range." Zerwin's spine stiffened. "To where?" Ursek hesitated. "To us." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. The humans hadn't come unprepared. They had simply chosen not to show their weapons. Zerwind exhaled. The sound, a low, vibrating hum. The galaxy had rules. Power was displayed, dominance asserted. But these humans, they played a different game, and he was only just beginning to understand the rules. Word count. Faye the Xerion bio. Scanner hummed softly in Ursek's grasp, its photosynthetic filaments pulsing with yellow-green light as it swept over the humans. The device was a masterpiece of Xerion engineering, a living instrument, grown and refined over generations to analyze biological signatures with flawless precision. Yet now, it stuttered. Ursek's neural tendrils flicked in irritation, her primary eyes narrowing as the readings scrolled across the scanner's organic display. The data made no sense. Human skeletal density, Phe above standard galactic baseline. Neural conductivity, enhanced. Unidentified cybernetic clusters, detected along spinal column. Cardiac redundancies, secondary vascular networks, present organ reinforcement, consistent with high-impact trauma mitigation. She recalibrated, scanned again. The results remained. Ursek's secondary eyes swiveled towards Zerwind, her bioluminescent markings dimming in unease. "Commander," she murmured, her voice a low harmonic vibration. "The readings are aberrant." Zerwin's dorsal spines flexed, a subtle ripple of tension. "Explain." Ursek hesitated. The humans stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. The female officer, Harriman, watched them with quiet intensity, her arms folded. The male, McKay, had the relaxed posture of a predator at rest, his gaze flicking between the Xerion crew with unsettling familiarity. "Their physiology is augmented," Ursek finally said, "not through external implants, but integrated modifications. Their bodies have been reinforced." Zerwind exhaled through his respiratory vents, the sound a slow, measured hiss. Galactic species modified themselves. Of course, neural enhancements, genetic optimizations, biomechanical grafts, but those were improvements, refinements of an already advanced biology. This was different. This was retrofitting, as if the humans had taken their fragile baseline forms and forced them to endure conditions they were never meant to survive. Airsick's scanner lingered over McKay's left arm. The reading spiked. Subdermal alloy lattice detected. Impact dispersion matrix active. She blinked. This one, his arm. It's armored? McKay tilted his head, his lips quirking in something too sharp to be a smile. Old injury, he said, voice rough. Got tired of breaking it. Xerion's neural tendrils coiled tight. This wasn't faulty data. This was intentional. The humans had not simply evolved for war. They had sculpted themselves for it. Every physiological anomaly was a scar, a patch, a brutal adaptation carved into flesh by necessity. Airsick's scanner drifted to Harriman's torso. The readings flared again. Ribcage reinforcement, fracture, resistant ossification patterns detected. Lung capacity, Phe above species baseline, metabolic regulation, enhanced cortisol suppression. Harriman met Airsick's gaze, her expression unreadable. You're wondering how many times we had to break before we learned not to. The docking bay's energy webs flickered, casting jagged shadows across the humans' faces. Xerion felt something cold settle in his core. The galaxy had long dismissed humans as soft, fragile, creatures of fleeting lifespans and brittle bones. But the scanners didn't lie, and neither did the veterans standing before him. They had been broken, and they had rebuilt themselves stronger. Airsick's grip tightened on the scanner. "Commander," she whispered, "this isn't augmentation. This is survival." Xerion said nothing. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken understanding. The humans had not come to prove their strength. They had come to show what it cost them, and for the first time, Xerion wondered if the galaxy had underestimated not their resilience, but their price. Word count. Phe the Xerion delegation moved through the human vessel's corridors, their bioluminescent footfalls casting eerie green reflections against the cold steel walls. The air smelled of ozone and something else. Something organic, like old blood and gun oil. Commander Xerion kept his sensory frills tight against his skull, his instincts prickling at the unfamiliarity of it all. Ahead, Major Harriman walked with the easy confidence of a predator in its own territory. Beside her, Sergeant McKay moved with the quiet precision of a blade sheathed but ready. The humans had been polite, accommodating even, but there was a weight to their presence, an unspoken history that clung to them like radiation. Airsick, ever the scientist, had been studying the humans with a fascination bordering on unease. Her scanner pulsed softly in her grasp, its readings flickering between disbelief and alarm. The human's physiology was riddled with scars, not just the physical kind, but neural pathways reforged under stress, endocrine systems recalibrated by trauma. They were built for war in ways no galactic species had ever deemed necessary. Then McKay spoke. Europa was worse. The words were casual, tossed into the silence like a grenade, with the pin already pulled. Xerion's frills twitched. Europa. McKay didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the bulkhead, somewhere the Xerions couldn't see. Yeah, served there before they pulled us back for this assignment. Airsick's scanner chirped, its readings spiking. She hesitated, then asked the question Xerion hadn't yet formed. A territorial dispute. McKay's lips curled. Not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. No. Harriman exhaled sharply through her nose, a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so hollow. Europa wasn't a dispute. The corridor lights flickered, casting the humans' faces in jagged shadows. McKay's voice was low, measured. It was an extermination. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Airsick's fingers tightened around her scanner. You mean? Harriman cut her off. We mean exactly what he said. Xerwin's pulse thrummed in his secondary veins. The humans had spoken of war before, but always in the abstract. Skirmishes, rebellions, the expected chaos of a young species. But this was different. McKay finally turned to look at them, his eyes dark. You ever fight something that doesn't stop? Something that doesn't bleed, doesn't retreat, doesn't care if it dies? The Xerions had no answer. Harriman's voice was steel. We did. Ursic's scanner whirred, its readings spiraling into incomprehensibility. The humans' vitals hadn't spiked. Their breathing remained steady. That was the most unnerving part. They spoke of horror with the same detachment as a weather report. Xerwin forced himself to ask, "What were you fighting?" McKay's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter. What matters is what we learned. Harriman met Xerwin's gaze, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't calculation or control. It was warning. Survival isn't about strength, she said softly. It's about how many times you can get back up. The docking bay's energy webs pulsed, their yellow-green light washing over the humans like a sickly tide. Xerwin realized, with the slow, creeping dread, that the galaxy had made a fatal mistake. They had dismissed humans as soft, but soft things don't survive Europa, and they don't walk away smiling. Word count. The Xerion training hall hummed with the low thrum of photosynthetic energy, its walls woven from living metal that pulsed in time with the warriors' movements. Lieutenant Voryx flexed his talons, the bioluminescent veins beneath his emerald skin flaring with amusement as he watched the humans. They were small, softer, limbed than any warrior caste, their bodies lacking the natural armor of hardened chitin or the reflexive speed of a predator species. The one called McKay stood with his arms crossed, observing the sparring matches with detached interest. A soldier, the translator had called him, a primitive title for a primitive creature. Voryx couldn't resist. He stepped forward, his voice dripping with the honeyed condescension of the highborn. Tell me, human, do your people even train for combat, or do you simply trip into victory? The other Xerion warriors chuckled, their crests flickering with mirth. McKay didn't react, his eyes, flat, unreadable, locked onto Voryx. Then he smiled. It wasn't the bared teeth threat display of a cornered beast. It was the slow, deliberate curve of a man who had measured his opponent and found him wanting. I've got 5 minutes, McKay said. Voryx blinked. What? McKay rolled his shoulders. You want to see human training? Let's spar. A ripple of disbelief passed through the Xerion. Sparring with a human, it was absurd. Their physiology was all wrong. No claws, no natural weapons, just fragile limbs and slow reflexes. Voryx's pride flared. He would humiliate this creature. The training circle formed around them, the floor's organic fibers shifting to cushion impacts. Voryx settled into a combat stance, his body coiled like a spring. McKay just stood there, loose, relaxed. The signal pulsed. Voryx lunged, and the world tilted, a blur of motion. A grip like durasteel clamped around his wrist. His arm twisted, his balance shattered, and then the breath exploded from his lungs as his back hit the mat. McKay's knee pressed against his throat, not enough to crush, just enough to pin. The human's other hand hovered near Voryx's eyes. Fingers curled into a shape the translator couldn't name. 6 seconds. McKay leaned down, his voice a murmur. That's Krav Maga. We don't train for honor. We train to kill. Then he stood, offering a hand. Voryx stared at it, his mind reeling. The human had moved faster than should have been possible. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just efficiency, honed into something lethal. Xerwin watched from the shadows, his crest stiff with unease. The humans hadn't just survived Europa. They had weaponized suffering, and now the galaxy would learn what that meant. The archives hummed with the soft, pulsing glow of Xerion bio, lights their yellow-green luminescence casting long shadows across the organic data terminals. Ursic's fingers moved over the living interface, coaxing tendrils of information from the depths of the galactic network. The human records were fragmented, deliberately obscured, but not enough. Not for long, the first file unfolded before him, a declassified report from something called Project Icefang. Ursic's breath caught. The images were grainy, distorted by time and encryption. But the horror was unmistakable. Human soldiers, unarmored, their faces exposed to the void of Europa's frozen hell, fighting in conditions that should have liquefied their organs within minutes. Yet they moved, they fought, their bodies wreathed in nothing but thermal suits and sheer unrelenting will. One frame seared itself into Ursic's mind, a human, half buried in ice, dragging a comrade through a blizzard of razor-edged frost. The temperature readout flickered at the edge of the screen. Impossible. No species could endure that. Not without hibernation, not without genetic modification. The humans had. Ursic's tendrils coiled tight against his neck. He pulled up another record, Operation Sunscorch. Desert warfare, a wasteland where the air itself burned at face, where the ground could sear flesh from bone in seconds. The humans had marched through it, fought through it. Some had collapsed, yes, some had died. But others had kept walking. One soldier, identified only as Sergeant McKay, Peeb, had been documented dragging 2 wounded comrades 8 kilometers under enemy fire, his skin peeling from dehydration, his muscles locked in spasms. He had reached the extraction point. He had survived. Ursic's pulse thrummed in his secondary veins. This wasn't endurance. This was something else. Something worse. He opened the final file. Blackwatch Psych Evaluations. The words alone sent a chill through him. Interviews, medical reports, neural scans, all detailing the same impossible truth. Human soldiers did not break, not in ways that mattered. One transcript stood out. Subject Harriman, E. Major interrogation duration. Fey hours, continuous methods applied, sensory deprivation, thermal stress, neural disruption result, no actionable intelligence extracted. Subject recited military regulations for entire duration upon release. Requested immediate return to duty. Ursic's tendrils went slack. This wasn't resilience. This was insanity. Xerion dismissed the report with a flick of his wrist, the bioluminescent data dissolving into the air. Irrelevant. Ursic stiffened. High Captain, these records are outdated. Xerion's voice was smooth, controlled, but the emerald flush beneath his scales betrayed his irritation. Humans adapt, yes, but adaptation is not strength. It is desperation. They have no true discipline, no unity beyond their primitive pack instincts. Ursic hesitated. The evidence was there. The patterns were there. But Xerion had already turned away, his gaze fixed on the holographic war map flickering above the command dais. Their endurance means nothing if they lack the will to wield it, and their will is fractured, divided by their own petty conflicts. Ursic wanted to argue, wanted to point to the files, to the numbers, to the cold, unrelenting truth of what humans had already survived. But the High Captain's mind was made up, and so, silently, Ursic closed the archives. The warnings had been given. They would not be heeded. Section Faye. The uninvited guests, the Xerion cruiser Emerald Tides drifted through the void between star systems, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of photosynthetic energy. The command deck hummed with the quiet efficiency of a crew that had spent decades mastering deep space transit. Xerion stood at the central dais, his talons resting on the organic control nodes, watching the holographic star map ripple like liquid emerald before him. Ursic, 3 decks below in the research annex, barely noticed the shift in the ship's ambient energy signature. His focus was locked on the human war archives, the data streams flickering across the curved bio screen, like ghosts whispering secrets. The patterns were undeniable. Human resilience wasn't just endurance. It was adaptation turned into doctrine. They didn't just survive chaos, they weaponized it. Then the alarm shrieked. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was biological, a shrill, vibrating pulse through the ship's neural network, the Xerion equivalent of a scream. Arsek's frill snapped erect, his pupils contracting to slits as the deck beneath him shuddered. The emerald tides had been ambushed in the dead zone between gravitational wells, where no patrols ventured. The attackers were Crixus marauders, scavengers, slavers, butchers who stripped ships bare and sold the crews to the flesh. Markets of the Outer Rim. Their vessels were cobbled together from stolen tech, jagged and asymmetrical, their hulls scarred with the residue of 100 raids. Zerwin's voice crackled through the ship's neural comms, sharp with command. All hands, defensive stations. Seal the growth nodes. Prepare repulsor fields. Ursek abandoned the archives, his pulse thundering in his secondary veins. The Crixus didn't take prisoners. They harvested. Then he noticed the humans. Major Harriman and Sergeant McKay had been confined to the observation deck, a courtesy gesture that now felt like a fatal oversight. The security feed on Arsek's screen showed them standing calmly as the ship trembled around them. No panic, no hesitation. Then the doors sealed, not by Xerion command. The humans had locked themselves in. Arsek's frill flared in confusion. Were they hiding, surrendering? Then the feeds flickered, and the truth unfolded. Harriman moved first, her hands flying across the observation decks, control panel with terrifying familiarity. She shouldn't have known the Xerion interface. She shouldn't have been able to bypass the security protocols, but the data logs showed her slicing through the system like she'd been studying it for years. McKay, meanwhile, had pried open a maintenance panel in the wall, exposing the ship's bio-mechanical nerve clusters. His fingers moved with surgical precision, rerouting energy flows, splicing into the ship's sensory web. Arsek's blood ran cold. They weren't hiding, they were hunting. The Crixus boarding pods struck like parasites, burrowing into the Emerald Tide's outer hull with barbed proboscises, injecting swarms of cybernetic mites to chew through the living metal. The first breach came in the lower decks, a dozen Crixus warriors spilling into the corridors, their exoskeletons glistening with toxin, coated blades, their multi-jointed limbs scuttling like insects. Xerion defenders met them with bio-electric pulses, their organic staves discharging searing yellow-green arcs. But the Crixus were prepared, their armor insulated, their tactics brutal. A Xerion soldier fell, his chest cavity split open by a serrated hook. Another screamed as a neural disruptor liquefied his nervous system. Then the lights died. For 3 heartbeats, the ship plunged into darkness. When the bioluminescence flickered back on, the Crixus were gone, not retreated. Zerwin's comms erupted with frantic reports. High Captain, Deck 7 clear. No hostiles. Deck 4 secure. They just disappeared. Then the security feeds reactivated, and Arsek saw the humans had turned the ship itself into a weapon. Harriman had hijacked the environmental controls, flooding targeted corridors with oxygen-saturated air, while McKay overcharged the bioelectric conduits. The Crixus never saw the spark. The explosion wasn't fire. It was ignition. A single brutal flash of superheated plasma ripping through the raiders, turning their bodies into charred husks before they could scream. The survivors regrouped, lunging for the humans' last known location. They found McKay waiting. The sergeant stood in the center of the corridor, his posture relaxed, his hands empty. The Crixus hesitated, then attacked. McKay moved like a machine. Arsek had studied human combat, crude, inefficient, reliant on brute strength. But this was something else. McKay's strikes weren't just fast, they were economical. Every motion flowed into the next, redirecting momentum, exploiting weak points in the Crixus exoskeletons. A knee shattered, a throat crushed, A spine snapped over his shoulder. The last raider died with McKay's combat knife, buried in its primary nerve cluster. By the time Xerion's security team arrived, it was over. The humans stood amid the carnage, their uniforms pristine, their breathing steady. Harriman met the High Captain's gaze without flinching. "You were right," she said, her voice calm. "We don't have your discipline or your unity." She stepped over a Crixus corpse, her boots leaving no prints in the blood. "But you've never seen what happens when we're cornered." Xerion said nothing. For the first time in his life, the High Captain of the Xerion fleet felt the cold, creeping weight of doubt. Ursik, watching from the shadows, closed the security feed. The warnings had been given. Now they had been demonstrated. The observation chamber hummed with the low, pulsing glow of Xerion bio. Lights, their yellow-green luminescence, casting long shadows across the organic curves of the walls. The air smelled faintly of ozone and the sharp metallic tang of freshly activated neural interfaces. Standard for high security debriefings aboard a Xerion command vessel. High Captain Xerion stood motionless at the center of the chamber, his emerald-scaled hands clasped behind his back. His secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second, a reflexive gesture of unease. The humans had been escorted here under guard, though the formality of it now seemed laughable. They had needed no escort. They had walked, calm, unhurried, their boots clicking against the living metal floor, with the same measured rhythm as before the slaughter. Across from him, Major Elizabeth Harriman sat with her spine straight, her hands resting lightly on the table. She looked like a diplomat, not a soldier who had just torn through a Crixus boarding party with her bare hands. Sergeant McKay stood behind her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Ursik, the lead xenopsychologist, activated the chamber's neural recorder, the tendrils of his cranial interface, pulsing with faint bioluminescence as they synced with the ship's organic databanks. "You will explain," Xerion said, his voice a controlled hiss. Harriman tilted her head slightly, as if considering the request. Then she smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "You never asked," she said. Ursik's frills twitched. The humans had been aboard for weeks. They had been scanned, analyzed, questioned, but always within the parameters of Xerion assumptions. They had been treated as a curiosity, a species still clawing its way out of barbarism. And yet, they had not corrected those assumptions. "You assumed we were soft," Harriman continued, her tone conversational, "that our lack of unity made us weak, that our history of conflict was a sign of instability, not adaptation." Ursik's neural feed flickered as he accessed the records. Human wars, countless, brutal, spanning centuries. But the Xerion analysis had been clinical, detached. They had noted the destruction, the casualties, the technological progression, but they had not understood the context. "You saw our wars," McKay said, his voice a low rumble, "but you didn't see what came after." Ursik's tendrils pulsed as the chamber's holographic display activated, projecting a stream of human historical data, wars against rogue artificial intelligences, machines that had turned on their creators, forcing humanity to fight an enemy that learned faster, adapted quicker. Exosolar horrors, things that had slithered out of the void, creatures that defied biology, that consumed entire colonies before humanity burned them out of the sky with plasma and nuclear fire. And then, the wars against themselves, not just battles, but sieges, planets glassed, cities reduced to ash. And yet, every time, they rebuilt. Every time, they adapted. "You call us fractured," Harriman said, her voice quiet. "But we don't unite because we're told to. We unite because we choose to, because we've seen what happens when we don't." Xerion's claws flexed involuntarily. The implications were staggering. The Xerion Dominion had thrived on unity, on the absolute adherence to hierarchy. The idea of a species that functioned despite its divisions was alien to him. The humans had not just survived their chaos, they had weaponized it. Ursik's neural feed stuttered as he processed the data. The psychological profiles of human veterans. Soldiers who had fought in wars that should have broken them, who had faced horrors that would have shattered a Xerion's mind. And yet, they stood here, unbroken. "You wanted to know why we fight the way we do," McKay said, his voice like gravel. "It's simple. We've had a lot of practice." The chamber fell silent. For the first time, Xerwin understood this was not a species that had stumbled into strength. This was a species that had been forged in fire, and the galaxy had only just begun to see what they were truly capable of. The transmission from Earth arrived in pulses of compressed data, its encryption layers peeling away like the shedding skin of some ancient beast. Xerwin watched as the holographic display flickered to life in the heart of the Xerion command nexus, its amber glow casting jagged shadows across the chamber's organic walls. The air hummed with the low-frequency resonance of the Dominion's bio, servers processing the feed, their photosynthetic nodes pulsing faster as the files unfurled. What emerged from the static was not the expected footage of human weakness, no crumbling cities or panicked civilians. Instead, the screen filled with the aftermath of war, but not the kind Xerwin had anticipated. These ruins were alive. The footage showed shattered cities, skyscrapers sheared in half, streets cratered by orbital bombardment, entire districts reduced to skeletal husks. And yet, even as the dust still settled, humans moved among the wreckage. Not fleeing, not weeping, cranes of retrofitted military salvage lifted girders into place. Squads of engineers in patched exo suits welded broken infrastructure back together with jury. Rigged plasma torches, makeshift hospitals, assembled from the husks of downed dropships, pulsed with triage lights as medics worked in shifts that never seemed to end. The timestamp reset. 2 weeks later, the same city stood reborn. Not as it had been. No, the architecture was jagged now, brutalist, its new structures bearing the scars of their hasty construction. But it stood, it functioned. Xerwin's neural tendrils coiled tight. This was impossible. No species could recover so quickly. No civilization could endure such devastation and rebuild before the fires had even cooled. Ursek's bio scanner flared as he referenced the data. His voice, when it came, was stripped of its usual clinical detachment. "They do not just repair," he murmured. "They adapt, they improve." The footage shifted again. This time, it showed a shipyard. Not the sleek, organic growth, vessels of the Xerion Dominion, but a human orbital dock, a monstrous sprawl of welded steel and exposed reactor cores, its scaffolds crawling with engineers. At its heart, suspended in the void like a sleeping predator, was a warship. But not just any warship. This one bore the scars of battle across its hull, great rents in its armor, entire sections blackened by plasma burns. Yet its weapon arrays had been expanded, its thrusters reinforced, its reactor shielding layered with new alloys that glowed faintly under ultraviolet scans. Ursek's tendrils trembled as the scanner identified the modifications. "These are not standard upgrades," he said. "These are field modifications, improvised, designed by soldiers who refused to let their vessel die." The final transmission was the most damning. Security footage from a human military academy. A training exercise. Cadets, children by Xerion standards, fought in simulated urban combat. Their tactics were unorthodox, their formations fluid. They used the terrain against their opponents, turned weaknesses into traps, turned retreats into ambushes. A voice crackling over the comms. "Fall back." Hell no, we're not falling back. The cadets charged. Into gunfire, into certain death, and they won. Xerwin's claws dug into the command console, his bioluminescent veins darkening with something he had never felt before. Not of human weapons, of human will. The transmission ended, silence filled the chamber. Ursek exhaled, his neural feed flickering with the weight of realization. "Their softness was never weakness," he said. "It was a choice." Xerwin stared at the empty screen. The humans had let the galaxy believe they were fragile, And now he understood why. It was the oldest tactic of all. Let your enemy underestimate you. Then show them what you truly are. The silence in the command chamber stretched like a live wire, humming with unspoken implications. Xerion's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, their usual emerald glow dimmed to a sickly amber. The holographic display before him had gone dark, but the images burned behind his eyelids. Human cadets, outnumbered and outgunned, refusing to yield, refusing death itself, as if it were merely an inconvenience. Ursek's voice, when it came, was a whisper of disturbed air through his respiratory vents. They were never what we believed. Xerion didn't answer. His mind reeled through the simulations again, dissecting every moment. The humans hadn't just fought. They had adapted. Mid-battle, in real time, no pre-programmed tactics, no rigid doctrine, just raw, fluid ingenuity. And that final charge, it hadn't been desperation. It had been calculation. A chime broke the silence. The comms array flickered to life, its organic interface pulsing with an unfamiliar energy signature. Human. Xerion hesitated. His claws flexed, the tips pressing into the bioluminescent gel of the command console. Accepting the transmission meant acknowledging what he now knew, that the galaxy had misjudged humanity, that he had misjudged them. He opened the channel. The hologram resolved into the sharp-featured face of Major Elizabeth Harriman. Her uniform was crisp, her posture relaxed, but her eyes, Xerion had seen predators with less intensity. "Commander Xerion," she said, her voice smooth, devoid of the tension that thrummed through the Xerion command chamber. "I trust our little demonstration was." Enlightening. Ursek's neural filaments twitched. Xerion forced his own to steady. "You let us believe you were weak," Xerion said, the words bitter on his tongue. Harriman's lips quirked. "We let you believe what you wanted to believe." The truth of it settled like a blade between his ribs. The humans had allowed the galaxy to dismiss them, to mock their softness, to overlook them. "Why reveal yourselves now?" Xerion demanded. Harriman tilted her head. "Because we're offering you a choice." A holographic projection bloomed beside her. A star map, but not one Xerion recognized. Not Xerion territory, not any known galactic power. Human space, and it was vast. Fortress worlds, all hidden, all thriving, all armed. Xerion's respiratory system hitched. The scale was staggering. Humanity hadn't just survived. They had expanded. While the galaxy laughed at their primitive wars they had been building. "We could have fought," Harriman said. "We could have let you attack, then crushed you. But that's not what we want." She leaned forward, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not malice, but something worse. "We're offering an alliance, not as subjects, not as inferiors, as equals." The words hung in the air. Ursek made a low, distressed sound. Xerion's mind raced. The thought was unthinkable, and yet the simulations, the hidden colonies, the sheer scale of their deception. This wasn't an offer. It was a test. Harriman watched him, unblinking. "You have one solar cycle to decide." The transmission cut. The chamber plunged back into silence. Xerion stared at the empty space where the hologram had been, his neural tendrils coiled tight, his bioluminescence flickering with turmoil. Pride demanded refusal, survival whispered otherwise. Ursek exhaled, his voice barely audible. They were holding back. Xerion closed his eyes, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. The silence in the Xerion command chamber stretched like a taut wire, humming with unspoken dread. Xerion's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, their usual rhythmic glow now fractured by uncertainty. The holographic embers of the human transmission had faded, but their words lingered, searing into his consciousness. The concept was absurd. The Xerion Dominion had ruled this sector for millennia, their bioluminescent fleets carving order from chaos. their living ships pulsing with the wisdom of ancient genetic memory. And yet, a proximity alert shattered the stillness. Ursek's frilled neck membranes flared in alarm as the organic sensor arrays flared yellow-green, their photosynthetic receptors drinking in the sudden disturbance. A vessel had emerged from the void. Not human, not Xerion, old enemies, the Kethor. Zerwin's blood ran cold. The Kethor were relics of a war long past, a scourge the Dominion had purged from the stars centuries ago. Their ships were jagged obsidian monoliths, their technology a perversion of life, grafting biomechanical horrors onto stolen flesh. They should not exist, and yet one drifted now at the edge of the system, its silhouette a jagged wound against the stars. The bridge crew froze. Even the living architecture of the command chamber seemed to recoil, its vine, like support structures tightening in reflexive dread. A human voice crackled over the comms. "Zerwind, you seeing this?" Major Harriman's tone was calm. Too calm, Zerwin's tendrils coiled. "You knew we had intel." A pause. "We also have a solution." Before he could respond, the void rippled. Human ships. Dozens of them blinked into existence, their angular hulls stark against the organic curves of Xerion and Kethor design. These were not the sleek, deceptive vessels from earlier. These were warships, their armor blackened by battle scars, their weapon ports glowing with restrained fury. At their lead, the indomitable Zerwin scanners screamed as they parsed the data. The human flagship was a monstrosity of war, its hull layered with ablative plating designed to shrug off energy lances, its spinal-mounted railgun humming with the promise of relativistic annihilation. But it wasn't the weapons that sent a primal shiver through Zerwin's spine. It was the silence. No taunts, no declarations, just the cold, methodical readiness of predators who had done this before. The Kethor vessel twitched, its obsidian surface writhing as it recognized the threat. Then it moved, not with the graceful arcs of Xerion drives, but with a sickening lurch, like a corpse jerked upright by unseen strings. The humans did not hesitate. The Indomitable fired first. A railgun round streaked across the void, a hypersonic spear of tungsten and hate. It struck the Kethor amidships, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the enemy ship unfolded, its hull peeling back in a grotesque blossom of shattered armor and venting atmosphere. Secondary explosions tore through its innards, the detonations silent in the vacuum, but no less horrific. The Xerion crew watched, stunned. This was not warfare as they knew it. There was no dance of energy shields, no elegant exchange of plasma volleys. This was brutality, distilled to its purest form, and the humans were just getting started. Fighters launched from the Indomitable's bays, their engines flaring like miniature suns. They swarmed the crippled Kethor vessel, their guns spitting depleted uranium and plasma in equal measure. Boarding pods followed, slamming into the enemy hull like surgical strikes. Then the feed cut to interior visuals. Zerwin's stomachs lurched. Human soldiers, exo-troopers, moved through the Kethor's corridors with terrifying efficiency. Their armor was scarred, their weapons modified beyond standard issue, their movements honed by 1,000 battles. They did not flinch at the biomechanical horrors that shambled toward them. They did not pause at the sight of half-fused crew, their bodies twisted into living weapons. They simply ended them. One trooper, Sergeant McKay, his ident tag flickered, planted a shaped charge on a pulsating organic bulkhead, then turned and fired a single shot into the skull of a Kethor hybrid. The thing collapsed, its stolen limbs twitching. McKay didn't even break stride. Ursek made a sound like a dying vine. "They're not afraid." Zerwin's bioluminescence dimmed. Because this wasn't new to them, the realization struck him like a plasma bolt. The humans had known the Kethor would return. They had prepared for it, while the Dominion had buried the past. The humans had kept their blades sharp, their guns loaded, and now they fought not for glory, not for conquest, but because it was necessary. The last Kethor died screaming, its form dissolving under a hail of incendiary rounds. The human ships regrouped, their weapons cooling, their fighters returning to their nests. Silence reclaimed the void. Then Harriman's voice again, soft but unyielding. That's what we bring to an alliance, Xerion. Not just strength, not just resilience. We bring the will to do what must be done. The transmission ended. Xerion exhaled, his neural tendrils slackening. Pride warred with pragmatism. Survival whispered louder. He turned to Ursek. Prepare the response beacon. The scientist hesitated, and the terms. Xerion's bioluminescence steadied, pulsing once firm.